She dropped the scrub brush the moment he walked in. Not because she was startled, because he was holding a marriage contract. And her name was already on it. "Sign it," Nathaniel Whitmore said. No greeting, no explanation. He placed it on the wet stone floor beside her bucket like it was nothing. Like she was nothing. "I need a wife by sunset." "You'll do." Olivia Hartwell looked at the paper. Then at him. Then she stood up slowly, deliberately, and said the 4 words that made the most powerful man in Kentucky go completely silent. "I don't think so." If this story stops your heart the way it stopped mine, subscribe right now. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from. And stay with Olivia all the way to the end, because what she does next will change everything. "I don't think so." 3 words, 4 seconds of silence. Then Nathaniel Whitmore did something nobody in Whitmore Estate had seen him do in 35 years of living. He blinked. "I beg your pardon," he said. Olivia Hartwell didn't raise her voice. Didn't step back. She stood in the east corridor with her raw hands and her worn dress and her wooden bucket, and she looked at the most powerful landowner in Kentucky like he had just said something mildly puzzling. "I said I don't think so," she said. "Sir." The word "sir" landed like a door closing politely in someone's face. Thomas, the house steward, had gone the color of old chalk. 2 younger maids who had been passing through the corridor had stopped completely. Frozen in place, holding laundry like they'd forgotten what laundry was. Nathaniel stared at her. "Do you understand?" he said carefully. "What I'm offering you?" "Yes," she said. "Do you understand what you're refusing?" "Yes," she said again. "I understand both things clearly. That's why I'm refusing." He picked the contract up off the floor. She noticed his jaw tighten just slightly, just once before he controlled it. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "I have 6 hours before sunset." "I don't have time for what?" she said. "For me to think about it?" "For negotiation." "I'm not negotiating," she said. "I'm telling you no. Those are different things." He looked at her for a long moment. Outside, rain hammered the roof. The storm had been going 3 days. The candles in the corridor trembled. "Why?" he said finally. And something in his voice shifted, not much, just enough that she noticed. The word came out less like a demand and more like a man who genuinely didn't understand. She looked at him steadily. "Because you put the contract on the floor," she said. He didn't follow. "You could have handed it to me," she said. "You could have knocked on the doorframe. You could have said good morning." She paused. "You put it on the floor next to my bucket, like I was a problem you were solving. Like my answer was already decided." The corridor was completely silent. Thomas had stopped breathing. Nathaniel looked down at the contract in his hand. Then he looked back at her, and he did something she had not predicted. He held it out to her, properly, at arm's length, the way you hand something to a person. "Miss Hartwell," he said, "would you please read this?" She looked at his outstretched hand for a moment. Then she took the contract. She read it twice. That was the habit her father had drilled into her from the time she was 16, read everything twice. Trust nothing on the first pass and never sign a document you don't fully understand. It was a marriage contract, legally complete, his signature already at the bottom in dark, certain ink. The space for the second signature was blank. She read the terms. The settlement was modest. Residency at Whitmore Estate. Legal protections that came with the Whitmore name. Nothing excessive, nothing suspicious. She looked up. "This clause," she said, pointing. "Section 4. It says the settlement is void if the marriage ends before 5 years. Standard language," he said. "Standard language that protects you," she said. "Not me." His expression didn't change. "What would protect you?" "Change it to 2 years," she said. "And add a property clause if the marriage dissolves after 2 years. I retain right of residence for 6 months, enough time to arrange alternatives." Nathaniel stared at her. "You're negotiating," he said. "I thought I wasn't," she said. "I changed my mind." Something moved at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the ghost of one there and gone before it could be identified. "Thomas," he said, without looking away from her. "Sir." Thomas appeared instantly. the way good stewards always appeared. "Bring a pen and ink." "Yes, sir." They stood in the corridor and waited. The rain kept falling. The candles kept trembling, and Nathaniel Whitmore, richest man in the county, stood across from his housemaid with a marriage contract between them. And neither one looked away. Thomas returned with the pen. Nathaniel took it. He crossed out the 5-year clause himself, wrote 2 above it, added the property provision in the margin in his own handwriting, and initialed both changes. Then he held out the pen to her. She took it. "Good," Nathaniel said. He folded the contract. "We leave for the courthouse in 30 minutes. He walked away. She looked down at her bucket, at her scrub brush still lying on the wet floor. Mary, one of the young maids, appeared at her elbow. 16 years old, wide-eyed, barely breathing. "Miss Olivia," Mary whispered. "What just happened?" Olivia bent down and picked up her scrub brush. "Hand me that cloth," she said. "But your floor still needs finishing," Olivia said. "I have 28 minutes." The story of why Nathaniel Whitmore needed a wife by sunset was the kind of story that started with a dead man's pride and ended with a living man's desperation. His grandfather, Edmund Whitmore, had built the estate from raw Kentucky land through 40 years of hard work, harder winters, and a stubbornness that had become family legend. When he died, he left Nathaniel 1,500 acres, a house that needed repairs it never got, a debt that had grown like a vine through every wall, and one legal clause that Edmund had clearly considered generous. "Married by your 35th birthday, or the estate passes to the next Whitmore male heir." For 11 years, Nathaniel had assumed he had time. He had been wrong about that the way only very confident men manage to be wrong completely, without noticing, right up until the moment it became impossible to ignore. He had been engaged twice. The first woman left quietly when she learned about the debt. The second lasted longer, right up until last spring, when she married a tobacco merchant from Charlottesville instead. After that, the word traveled, the way it always traveled in a county where everybody knew everybody else's business before they knew their own. Whitmore's drowning, the land's mortgaged, the debt's older than the house. Every respectable family within 100 miles had found reasons to decline his invitations, which left him, on the morning of his 35th birthday, with 6 hours until sunset, a marriage contract with no name on it, and a housemaid who had just told him no. He had not expected the no. He had not expected any of what followed the no either. He sat in his study now, 10 minutes before the carriage was due, and tried to recall everything he actually knew about Olivia Hartwell. Arrived 2 years ago, single traveling bag, letter of reference from a Virginia family he didn't recognize. Quiet. No complaints, no trouble, no anything. That was everything. It occurred to him, sitting there, that this was a remarkably small amount of information about a woman he was about to marry. It occurred to him also that she had negotiated a legal contract in a corridor, from memory, without a lawyer, in approximately 4 minutes. He picked up his coat. Who, he thought, is this woman? The carriage ride to Lexington took 40 minutes. Nathaniel sat across from her and tried to read her the way he read everything, quickly, efficiently, looking for the angle that would make sense of the whole. She sat with her back straight, and her hands folded, and her eyes on the rain-blurred window. She had changed into her best dress, dark gray wool, pressed and clean, seen better days, but worn with the ease of someone who didn't measure her dignity by the quality of her clothes. She had not asked for jewelry, had not asked for a different carriage, had not asked for anything. He watched her for 10 minutes before he spoke. "How did you know the 5-year clause favored me?" he said. She glanced at him. "Because all standard clauses favor whoever drafted them. Most people don't read contracts carefully enough to catch that. Most people don't read them at all," she said. "That's generally how the people who draft them prefer it." He leaned forward slightly. "Where did you learn to read contracts?" She turned from the window and looked at him directly. Those gray eyes steady, measuring, not unkind but not soft either. The eyes of someone who had learned to assess situations quickly and trust their own assessment. My father was a merchant in Richmond, she said. Tobacco and textile shipping. I kept his ledgers from the time I was 16. Nathaniel said nothing. I also negotiated with shipping companies when he was unavailable, she said. And reviewed land contracts when he purchased the warehouse near the river. That was a poor investment, for the record. The flooding alone cost 4 years of profit. The carriage moved through the gray morning. Why are you scrubbing floors in Kentucky? Nathaniel said slowly. If you were managing a merchant's accounts in Richmond. Her chin lifted just slightly. Just once. Because my father died, she said. And his second wife decided his daughter from his first marriage had no claim on the business. She removed you from the accounts? She removed me from the house, Olivia said. Her voice stayed level, clear and level, the way a river stays level even when the ground shifts beneath it. 30 days and a small sum of money. I came to Kentucky because the wages at Whitmore Estate were honest and the work was consistent. He sat with that for a moment. I'm sorry, he said. She looked at him with a flicker of something not quite surprise, but close to it, like the word had landed somewhere she hadn't expected. You don't need to be, she said. I know I don't need to be, he said. I am anyway. She looked at him for a moment longer than necessary. Then she looked back at the window. Outside, a hawk was riding the wind above a bare winter field, tilting into the gusts with absolute patience. Neither of them spoke for the rest of the drive. The magistrate was a short man named Perkins who smelled of pipe tobacco and old leather, and who looked at Olivia the specific way people look at something placed where it doesn't belong. This is the lady, he said to Nathaniel. This is my bride, Nathaniel said. The correction was immediate and quiet, and completely without hesitation. Olivia noticed it. She stored it. She didn't let it show on her face. The ceremony took 9 minutes. The magistrate's wife served as second witness, a small, quick-eyed woman who kept glancing at Olivia with an expression somewhere between sympathy and fascinated disbelief. When it was done, Nathaniel signed. Then Olivia signed. Then it was legal. They walked back out into the cold. At the carriage door, Nathaniel put out his hand without thinking. Just put it out automatically, the way a man does when someone needs help up a step. She looked at it for a half-second. Then she took it. Neither of them mentioned it. Inside the carriage, heading back, Nathaniel said, I want to be honest with you about what this is. All right, she said. It's an arrangement, he said, a legal solution. I'm not going to dress it up as something it isn't. I appreciate that. You'll have your own room. Your own money within reasonable limits. I won't make demands beyond what's appropriate. That's fair. I just started again. I want you to know that I understand what I asked of you today. And what it cost you to say yes. She turned from the window. He was looking at his hands, not at hands, which were clasped between his knees, and there was something in his jaw that wasn't quite the same as before, something slightly less controlled. Slightly less certain. There it is, thought. The thing underneath. Mr. Whitmore, she said quietly. He looked up. You told me the truth this morning, she said. When you handed me that contract properly, when you came back and held it out instead of leaving it on the floor, that told me something. What did it tell you? She considered. That you're capable of reconsidering, she said. Most men aren't. He looked at her for a moment. Most men haven't been told no by someone they put a contract on the floor in front of, he said. No, she agreed. I imagine they haven't. The ghost of something crossed his face again. Warmer this time. Less controlled. He looked back out the window. Olivia, he said her first name, for the first time. Quiet and careful, like he was testing the weight of it. What do you actually want? Out of this, when everything settles. She thought about it for a real moment. Not performing consideration. Actually considering. I want to be useful, she said finally, not ornamental. Not grateful. He nodded slowly. I reckon I can work with that, he said. And there it was, that first small shift of language. That first step towards something more honest than a business negotiation. She turned back to the window. Outside, Kentucky spread wide and gray and full of possibility under a winter sky. She had been on her knees for 2 years. She was done with kneeling. They arrived back at Whitmore Estate at 5:15. The house rose through the mist-dark stone, old timber, every window lit against the evening gray. Olivia had spent 2 years looking at it from the inside, had never once approached it from the front drive as anything other than a servant returning from a supply errand. She looked at it now and felt something shift quietly in her chest. This is my home now, she thought. The thought was stranger than she had expected. The household was gathered in the entry hall. Not formally, there hadn't been time for formal. But they were there, the way servants always manage to be present for the moments that matter. Their faces carefully arranged into professional neutrality. Thomas at the front. Behind him, cook Margaret, who had known Olivia for 2 years and who now looked at her with wide eyes and an expression she couldn't quite categorize. And behind cook, the younger girls. Mary, little Ellen, 16 years old and clearly trying not to make a sound. Nathaniel walked in first. Normal duties resume tomorrow, he told Thomas. Mrs. Whitmore will be settling in this evening. Mrs. Whitmore. The name fell into the room like a stone into still water. Ripples went everywhere. Olivia walked in behind him. She looked at Mary, who had covered her mouth with both hands. She looked at Ellen, whose eyes were bright and overfull. She looked at Margaret, who was doing mathematics in her expression, adding things up, arriving at a sum, deciding what to do with it. Then she looked at Nathaniel, who was watching her watch them, waiting, not deciding for her. Just waiting, she faced the room. Good evening, she said, in the voice she had once used to address shipping agents and contract lawyers, clear. Level, carrying without effort. Tomorrow will be unusual for all of us. But the house still needs running, and that doesn't stop for anyone. I'd ask you to continue your work as you always have. She paused. And I want you to know, she said, quieter now, that I haven't forgotten where I spent the last 2 years. Mary started crying, silently, with great dignity, which was very Mary. Margaret made a sound that was technically a cough. Thomas bowed his head very slightly, very precisely, in a way that meant something specific in the language of a man who had worked in this house for 30 years. And then from the doorway of the east drawing room, a voice came, low, cold, carrying the weight of someone who had expected to be the most important person in any room he entered and had just discovered he wasn't. What, said Victor Caldwell, in God's name is going on here? Victor Caldwell was Nathaniel's uncle by marriage, Edmund Whitmore's sister's husband, which made him family in the technical sense and nothing warmer than that. He was 55 years old and built like a man who had once been physically powerful and still carried it as identity. Silver hair, eyes that were always moving, always calculating, always arriving at the same conclusion. What is the advantage here, and how do I take it? He had come to Whitmore Estate 6 months ago, officially to help his nephew through the estate's financial difficulties. He crossed the hall slowly, deliberately, the walk of a man who controlled every room he entered by controlling the pace at which he moved through it. He looked at Olivia, not with surprise, with the particular focused attention of someone identifying an obstacle. Nathaniel, he said, tell me I'm being told false information. You're not, Nathaniel said. You married the housemaid. I married Olivia Hartwell, Nathaniel said, who is now my wife. Victor turned his full attention to her. The kind of attention designed to make a person feel exposed. She had experienced it before from men who confused power with permission, and she had learned that the only response was to simply not diminish. She looked back at him, steady, calm, giving him nothing. Where are you from? He asked. The tone was not conversation. It was assessment. Virginia. She's family. My father was William Hartwell. A merchant, was, Victor repeated, picking up the past tense like a tool. He passed 4 years ago, she said. And your mother? When I was 12. Victor was quiet for a moment. Then he looked at Nathaniel with an expression that had settled into something deliberate and controlled. "We need to speak privately," he said. "Anything you need to say," Nathaniel said. "You can say in front of my wife." A pause. Something recalculated behind Victor's eyes. Of course. He produced a smile, thin, precise, the kind assembled rather than felt. "Welcome to the family, Mrs. Whitmore. I do hope you'll find your new circumstances comfortable." The word comfortable landed with a specific gravity. "A reminder you were the help. Don't forget it." Olivia smiled back at him pleasantly. "I'm sure I will," she said. "I've always adapted well. It's one of my better qualities." She held his gaze for exactly 1 second longer than was socially comfortable. Then she turned away first, because turning away first, when it was your choice, was different from being dismissed. She heard Victor's footsteps retreat toward the drawing room. She thought, that is the problem that requires solving. She thought, and he has no idea I've already started. Her room was on the second floor, east wing end of the hall. 3 times the size of the servants' quarters she'd lived in for 2 years. Fireplace, writing desk, windows that looked over the side garden and the row of apple trees beyond it bare now. Dark branches holding their shape against the winter sky. She stood in the center of it for a moment. "I am a married woman," she thought. "I have been married for 4 hours. I am standing in a room in a house I have scrubbed floors in for 2 years. And nobody will ask me to scrub floors tomorrow." She didn't know how to feel about that. She had expected something larger, relief or fear, or triumph. What she actually felt was the feeling of a person who has just stepped onto ice and is waiting, very quietly, to learn whether it will hold. A knock at the door. "Come in, Margaret," carrying a tray soup bread, something warm to drink, and an expression trying very hard to find the right shape for itself. "I didn't know if you'd eaten," Margaret said. "I haven't." "Thank you." Margaret set the tray on the writing desk, stood with her hands clasped, opened her mouth, closed it. Then finally said, "Miss Olivia," she said. "Just Olivia. Or whatever feels right to you." And Margaret's face finally found the shape it had been looking for. That warm, uncertain, completely genuine smile that Olivia had seen turned on other people for 2 years and never quite on herself. "How are you?" Margaret asked. Just that. No ceremony around it. "I genuinely don't know," Olivia says. "Ask me in a week." Margaret nodded. Turned to go. She stopped. Olivia kept her voice low. "Even. Who is Victor Caldwell? Tell me the truth, not the version people tell to be careful." Margaret was still for a moment. Then she said quietly, like someone reading from a list they'd been adding to for months. "He came 6 months ago. Since then, 2 farmhands let go for reasons that didn't hold up. The South Pasture lease renegotiated, but Mr. Whitmore's signature doesn't look right on the document. And last month the grain account came up $200 short." Olivia went very still. "Thomas reported it," Margaret said. "Mr. Caldwell called it a clerical error." "Was it?" Margaret looked at her steadily. "No," she said. "It was not." She left. Olivia sat down at the writing desk and looked at the wall. $200. She had learned to read accounts when she was 16. She had reviewed shipping manifests and land contracts and grain sale records for nearly a decade. She knew what money missing from a specific account looked like. She knew the difference between an error and a method. She looked at the soup. She looked at the writing desk. She stood up, walked to the door, opened it, and found Thomas in the corridor, almost like he'd been waiting. Which she suspected was exactly what he'd been doing. "Thomas," she said, "I need the estate financial records." The last 12 months he hesitated. As Mr. Whitmore's wife, she said quietly, "I have legal interest in the estate's finances." "Yeah, that's true." A long pause. "I'll have them brought up," he said. "Thank you," she said. "And Thomas, please don't mention this to anyone." He looked at her for a moment with those careful, 30-year steward's eyes. Then he nodded once. Nathaniel found her at 10:30. He had come to the study for a specific ledger and found the lamp already burning, the desk already occupied, 3 account books open, and Olivia seated behind them, with a page covered in numbers on her left side and a look of focused concentration that stopped him in the doorway. She looked up. "I should have asked permission," she said immediately. "Where did you get those?" Not anger. Something more careful. "Thomas," she said. "Don't be angry with him. I gave him good legal reasoning, and he's a thorough man." Nathaniel walked in slowly. Looked at the books. Looked at her numbers. Looked at her. "What are you doing?" he said. "Finding the $200, she said. He sat down. Not in the chair across from her, in the chair beside her. Close enough to see the page she was working on. She showed him without being asked. "Here," she said, pointing. 7 months of grain sale entries. The discrepancy isn't random, it's consistent. Always the same direction. Always favoring the same account. "Which account?" he said. She pointed. He looked at it. His face didn't change. But something behind it did something and tightened and went very still. The way things go still when they've been hit. "That's Victor's operating account," he said. "Yes," she said. "He's been managing that fund since he arrived." "I know," she said. Silence. The fire had burned low. The rain at the windows was just a whisper now. The old house settled around them, that deep, slow sound of a building breathing. "Olivia," his voice was quiet, not hard. Something more complicated than hard. "He's been family my whole life. I know that too," she said. And she said it gently, not because she was softening the truth, but because she understood what it cost to say those words in that order. "He's been family my whole life." Said the way you say something when you're starting to doubt it. "I'm not telling you he's a thief," she said. "Not yet. I need a week with these books, maybe less." She paused. "But I want to keep working quietly, without anyone knowing." He looked at her. "Why quietly?" he said. "Because a man who knows he's being watched changes what he does," she said. "And a man who thinks he's already won gets careless." Nathaniel looked at the account books for a long time. Then he said, "Maybe less," she said again. He nodded slowly. He stood, moved toward the door. "Stopped, Olivia." She looked up. He was standing in the doorway with his hand on the frame and his back not quite to her, that posture of a man who has something else to say and is deciding whether to say it. "This morning," he said, "when you told me no." She waited. "I've been thinking about it," he said. "All day. I can't stop thinking about it." "I imagine you're not used to it," she said. "No," he said, "I ain't." The word came out rougher than he intended. More honest. "But that's not." Tried again. "You were right," he said. "About the floor. I shouldn't have done it that way." That ain't who I want to be." The room was very quiet. "I know," she said simply. "How?" he said. "Because you picked it back up," she said. "And you held it out properly. And you initialed the changes yourself." She looked at him steadily. "A man who can't reconsider doesn't do those things." He stood in the doorway for a moment. "Get some rest," he said finally. "You've had a hell of a day." "So have you," she said. He almost smiled, almost. Then he was gone. She turned back to the numbers. Outside, through the dark window, the apple trees held their ground in the wind, bare and dark and rooted deep. Bending without breaking. She knew that feeling. She had been bending for 4 years. She was done bending. Starting now, she thought, I hold. The next morning came cold and clear, the kind of morning that felt like a test. Olivia was already awake before the house stirred. Old habit. 2 years of being the first one up, the last one to stop, had written itself into her body so deeply that no change of title was going to undo it overnight. She sat at the writing desk with the account books still open in front of her and a fresh page of numbers beside the ones she'd started last night. She had slept 3 hours. It was enough. By the time she heard the first sounds of the household waking footsteps in the corridor, the distant clang of the kitchen coming to life, she'd found 4 more discrepancies. All of them small, all of them pointing the same direction. All of them in accounts that Victor Caldwell had been touching for the past 6 months. She sat back and looked at what she had. It wasn't proof yet. Not the kind that would hold up in front of a lawyer. but it was the shape of proof, the outline of something deliberate and patient, and very carefully constructed by someone who had assumed nobody would ever look closely enough to find it. She closed the books, stacked them neatly, and went downstairs to face whatever the first morning of being Mrs. Whitmore was going to bring her. It brought her more than she expected. She walked into the kitchen, and Margaret looked up from the stove and said, in the exact same voice she'd used for 2 years, "Biscuits are almost done," and then caught herself and added, "Uncertainly, ma'am." "Don't," Olivia said. "Please." Margaret looked relieved in a way that was almost painful to watch. "Biscuits are almost done," she said again, this time without the ma'am. And it sounded right, and that small thing settled something in Olivia's chest that she hadn't realized was unsettled. She ate in the kitchen, not in the dining room, not at the long mahogany table set for one. In the kitchen, at the work table she'd eaten at for 2 years, with Margaret and young Ellen and the smell of wood smoke and fresh bread around her. Ellen was quiet through most of it, watching Olivia with those enormous 16-year-old eyes, until finally she couldn't hold it anymore and said, "Is it strange being different now?" "Ellen," Margaret said sharply. "It's all right," Olivia said. She considered the question honestly. "It's stranger than I expected," she said, "and less strange than I feared." Both at the same time. Ellen thought about that for a moment. "Did you know, when you first came here, that it would end up like this?" Olivia looked at her. "No," she said. "I came here to survive. That's all." And now she picked up her biscuit. "Now I'm doing something else," she said. "I haven't figured out exactly what to call it yet." She found out what to call it approximately 40 minutes later, when she walked into the main corridor and came face to face with Victor Caldwell. He was dressed formally for so early in the morning, like a man who had never stopped performing. Not even for the hours before the audience arrived. He looked at her with those bright, calculating eyes and said, pleasantly, "Mrs. Whitmore, you're up early." "I usually am," she said. "Old habits," he said. The word old landed with a very specific weight. She looked at him steadily. "Is there something I can help you with?" "Mr. Caldwell, I was going to ask you the same thing," he said. He fell into step beside her, which she hadn't invited. In the way powerful men often assumed their company was always welcome. "I imagine this is all very overwhelming. A new house, a new name, a new situation. I managed my father's shipping accounts from the time I was 16, she said. I think I can manage a new situation." A pause, brief. "Barely there." "Of course," he said smoothly. "A merchant's daughter." Yes, Nathaniel mentioned. He hadn't, and they both knew it. Still, the responsibilities of running an estate of this size are considerable, particularly for someone without experience in that area. "I'm a quick study," she said. "I don't doubt it." He stopped walking. She stopped too. Because stopping was a choice, and she was going to keep making her own choices. "I only mean to say," Victor said carefully, the way a man says something he's rehearsed, that Whitmore Estate has a great many complexities. Financial complexities, in particular. It would be easy for someone unfamiliar with the accounts to misunderstand things. And there it was. Not a threat. Not quite. Just a door slightly open, just enough to show what was standing behind it. She looked at him for a long moment. "Thank you for the warning," she said pleasantly. "I'll keep it in mind." She walked away. Her heart was beating faster than she wanted it to. Not from fear, she knew the difference. From the recognition of something confirmed. He knew or suspected that she'd been in the accounts. He was moving to protect himself, which meant he was already watching her. Which meant she had less time than she'd hoped. She found Thomas in the East Hall and said, quietly, "I need to speak with Mr. Whitmore before he starts his morning." Thomas looked at her with those 30-year steward eyes. "He's in the south study, ma'am. He asked not to be disturbed." "Tell him it's important," she said. Thomas hesitated for exactly 1 second. Then he went. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway of the south study 2 minutes later. Coat half on, looking like a man who had also not slept enough and was not pleased about being interrupted. He looked at her face, and something shifted in his expression. "What happened?" he said. "Victor knows I've been looking at the accounts," she said. "How do you know that?" "Because he just warned me," she said. Carefully. "But he warned me." Nathaniel was very still for a moment. Then he said, "Come inside." She followed him into the south study, and he closed the door behind them. "Tell me exactly what he said," Nathaniel said. She told him, word for word in the order it happened. He listened without interrupting, which she was beginning to understand was one of his qualities, not patience exactly, but a focused, directed kind of attention that took things in completely before responding. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. He said, "Financial complexities," Nathaniel repeated. "Yes, and misunderstand things." "Yes." He turned toward the window. His jaw was tight. "Victor has been telling me for 6 months that the estate's financial problems are more serious than I understood. That debts my grandfather contracted were worse than the records showed. That certain accounts needed restructuring." He stopped. "I trusted him. He's been family since I was 8 years old." She didn't say anything. There was nothing to say that the silence wasn't already saying. "How much did you find?" he said. "4 more discrepancies last night," she said. "Small ones, but consistent, all of them moving money the same direction. All of them in accounts he controls." Nathaniel turned from the window and looked at her. "How long to build something solid enough to take to a lawyer?" 3 days, she said. "If I can work without interruption." He nodded once. Hard, like a man making a decision he should have made sooner. "You'll have what you need," he paused. "And Olivia, be careful." "I intend to be," she said. She turned to go. "One more thing," he said. She stopped. "What he said about you being unfamiliar with estate responsibilities." His voice was careful. "Deliberate. That's not going to be the story this household tells about you. Not while I have anything to say about it." She held that for a moment. "Thank you," she said quietly. "I ain't saying it to be kind," he said. "I'm saying it because it's true. There's a difference." She left before he could see that land on her face. The thing was, she wasn't used to being seen that way. As capable, as knowledgeable, as someone whose understanding of a situation mattered. She had been managing her father's business since she was a girl, and it had always been treated as a convenience, something useful to have around. Like a good ledger book until it became inconvenient. Until she herself became inconvenient. She knew what it felt like to have your competence acknowledged as a tool and your personhood dismissed as irrelevant. Nathaniel Whitmore had said it's true, like her capability was simply a fact about the world. Like it didn't need explaining or defending or apologizing for. She walked back to the East Wing, with that sitting quietly in her chest, and tried not to make too much of it. It was a small thing, people said small things, but she stored it. The way she stored everything useful. She went back to the books. She was deep into the 3rd hour of work, following a thread through a series of land lease renewals that didn't add up to the reported values. When Mary knocked on the door. "There's a woman here," Mary said. Slightly breathless, the way Mary said everything when she was unsettled. "A Mrs. Hargrove. From town. She came with 2 other ladies. They're asking to see you." Olivia set down her pen. "What do they want?" Mary's expression did something complicated. "To welcome you," she said, in a voice that made it very clear welcoming was not what they intended at all. She went downstairs. 3 women were waiting in the front parlor. Seated, which meant they'd been invited to sit, which meant Thomas had been properly raised. They were dressed expensively and carefully, and they wore the particular expressions of women who had come to look at something and had already decided what they thought of it. The one in the center, Mrs. Hargrove, who Olivia understood immediately, was the one who mattered, was perhaps 60. With sharp eyes and good posture and the comfortable authority of a woman who had been the most important person in every room she'd entered for 30 years. "Mrs. Whitmore," she said. The name sat in her mouth like something she hadn't agreed to yet. "Mrs. Hargrove," Olivia said. She sat down across from them without waiting to be invited. "Thank you for calling." Mrs. Hargrove's eyes moved over her with the speed and thoroughness of an experienced assessment. "We wanted to welcome you to the county," she said. "It was quite a surprise, I must say. Nathaniel's marriage." "I imagine it was," Olivia said pleasantly. "We had all expected well," Mrs. Hargrove smiled. "We had all expected something a little more traditional." "Traditional," Olivia repeated. "A family of standing," said one of the other women, younger. Sharp-faced, clearly second in this particular hierarchy. "Someone with connections in the county. History here." "I see," Olivia said. She kept her voice absolutely even. "You mean someone you already knew?" "We mean someone appropriate," the sharp-faced woman said. And the word appropriate was a blade dressed up as a pleasantry. The room went slightly taut. Mrs. Hargrove lifted one hand fractionally, the smallest possible gesture of restraint directed at her companion. Then she looked back at Olivia. "We only mean to say that the circumstances were unusual. A housemaid becoming mistress of an estate. People will talk." "Mrs. Whitmore, they already are." "I know," Olivia said. A pause. Mrs. Hargrove had expected defensiveness, or embarrassment, or some form of shrinking. She got none of those things, and it showed in the slight adjustment around her eyes. "You don't seem troubled by it," she said. "I've been talked about before," Olivia said. "By people with less reason and more certainty. It didn't change what was true then, and it won't change what's true now." "And what is true, Mrs.?" Hargrove asked, genuinely curious now underneath all the social armor. "That I am Nathaniel Whitmore's wife," Olivia said. "That I intend to be a good steward of this estate. And that what people say about me in parlors is generally less interesting than what actually happens." She looked at Mrs. Hargrove directly. "I don't imagine that will be different here." Silence. Then, slowly, something in Mrs. Hargrove's expression shifted. Not warmth exactly. More like recalibration. The adjustment of a sharp mind encountering something it hadn't expected. "No," she said finally. "I don't imagine it will be." She set down her teacup. "You are not what I expected, Mrs. Whitmore." "I rarely am," Olivia said. The visit ended shortly after. Not badly, not the way Olivia had expected it might end. Mrs. Hargrove shook her hand at the door, with a grip that was more genuine than ceremonial, and said, "We'll call again," in a tone that suggested she actually meant it. The sharp-faced woman did not shake her hand. Olivia decided she could live with that. She was back at the desk within 20 minutes, but the thread of the morning had shifted something. And she found herself sitting with her pen in her hand and not writing, turning the shape of what she'd found so far over in her mind. Victor was moving money, small amounts consistently, in ways designed to look like administrative messiness rather than theft. The South Pasture lease renegotiation, she'd found the document Thomas had mentioned, and the signature did not look right, not after she'd compared it to 3 other documents with Nathaniel's genuine hand on them. The grain account discrepancy was part of a pattern that stretched back further than 6 months. She suspected, though she hadn't proven it yet, that it started almost immediately after Nathaniel's second engagement fell apart. When Victor had seen the opening, he had come here. She was increasingly certain not to help. He had come here to position himself, to accumulate enough control over the estate's finances that when the marriage clause expired and the estate's debts became impossible to manage or were made impossible to manage, he would be the natural person to take over. The estate that Nathaniel's grandfather had built with 40 years of hard work and stubborn love. She thought about what Nathaniel had said in the carriage. "My grandfather built this place with his hands." The way his voice had sounded when he said it, not proud. Ashamed, like a man who knew the weight of what he was at risk of losing and could not quite forgive himself for being in the position of losing it. She thought about the apple trees outside her window, about the way they bent in the wind without breaking. She thought about Victor's eyes this morning, the calculation in them, the confidence. "He thinks I don't know what I'm looking at," she thought. "He thinks I'm a girl who got lucky. Let him keep thinking that." She picked up her pen and went back to work. The second twist came from a place she hadn't anticipated. She was working through the land lease records third afternoon. Second day of working quietly, while Victor watched her with those bright, careful eyes at meals, and said nothing pointed but nothing warm either when she found the letter. It was tucked inside the back cover of the oldest account book, folded small and creased like it had been handled many times. She almost missed it, would have missed it, if she hadn't been running her fingers along the spine of the book looking for loose pages. She unfolded it. It was dated 14 months ago. Before Victor arrived, before the second engagement ended. Before any of this. It was a letter from Edmund Whitmore's lawyer written 2 years after Edmund died to a recipient whose name made her breath stop for a moment. Victor Caldwell. The letter described a provision in Edmund's original estate documentation. A secondary clause, separate from the marriage requirement, that had apparently not been included in the version of the will that Nathaniel had been shown. A clause that described specific conditions under which the estate could be claimed by a family member other than the primary heir. Specific conditions that, reading between the careful legal language, sounded remarkably like the conditions Victor had been quietly creating for the past 6 months. Her hands were completely steady. She had learned to keep her hands steady when her mind was moving fast, another thing her father had taught her. Though not intentionally. He had simply been a man who could not hide his reactions. And she had watched what that cost him and decided it would not cost her. She read the letter 3 times, then she folded it, placed it inside her dress, and sat very still for a moment. Victor hadn't come here to help Nathaniel. He had come here because someone had told him in a legal letter 14 months ago exactly how to take the estate away from him. And the marriage clause. The wife-by-sunset requirement that had sent Nathaniel scrambling through his own house looking for a solution. Victor had known about that clause in detail. She was almost certain now that Victor had been quietly, carefully, ensuring that none of Nathaniel's eligible prospects worked out. The rumors about the estate's debts that had traveled so efficiently through the county. The whispers about the financial difficulties that had made the first fiancé withdraw and contributed to the second one leaving. Victor had been building this for over a year, and she had found it in a book he'd forgotten he'd left behind. She needed to talk to Nathaniel. She needed to talk to him right now. She found him in the stable, which she hadn't expected. He was working alongside 2 farmhands coat off, sleeves rolled, doing something with a fence post that had cracked in the storm. He looked up when she appeared in the stable doorway, and whatever he saw in her face made him hand the post to the man beside him, without a word, and walk toward her. "What is it?" "Not here," she said quietly. He looked at the men, back at her, nodded once, and followed her out. They walked to the far end of the kitchen garden, where the bare herb beds gave them clear sight lines in every direction and no one could approach without being seen. Old instinct on her part. She was beginning to understand that old instincts were often old intelligence. She took the letter out and handed it to him. She watched him read it. She watched his face go through 3 distinct changes. The first was confusion. The second was understanding. The third was something she didn't have a precise word for. It lived somewhere between fury and grief, and it settled into a hard, quiet stillness that was worse than either. When he looked up, his eyes were dark. "He knew," Nathaniel said. "He already knew." "Yes," she said. "He knew about the clause in grandfather's will. The secondary clause I was never shown." His voice was controlled. "Just barely. Yes. About the debt." He stopped. His jaw worked. "Clara," he said. The name of the second fiancé, spoken like something that cost him. He said things to her family. I never knew what. She wouldn't tell me. He looked at the letter again. "He did this deliberately. He planned it," she said. "Carefully. Over a long time. He came here because he'd already laid the groundwork, take the estate the moment the conditions were right. The accounting irregularities, the lease renegotiation, those are the final steps. He's been building toward this for over a year." Nathaniel was quiet for a long time. He carried me on his shoulders when I was 6 years old, he said. Taught me to shoot. Came to my father's funeral. He said it not like a defensive victor, but like someone trying to understand how both things could be true at the same time, the man who carried a 6-year-old on his shoulders, and the man who had spent a year engineering his ruin. I know, Olivia said. This letter, he said. Where did you find it? Inside the back cover of the oldest account book, she said. I think he forgot it was there, or assumed no one would look that carefully. Nathaniel looked at her for a moment. Something moved through his expression, not the first time she'd seen it. This particular quality of attention, but this time it stayed longer. How long have you known, he said, that it was this big? I suspected since the night I started looking, she said. I was certain this morning. I needed this letter to understand the full shape of it. You found this in 3 days. 2.5, she said. He made a sound that was almost a laugh, not quite. Something rueful and real underneath it. He's been here 6 months, Nathaniel said. And I never... You trusted him, she said. That's not the same as being foolish. Trust isn't stupidity. He used something real to do something dishonest. That's on him. He looked at her. You're being generous. I'm being accurate, she said. There's a difference. Another moment of quiet. He folded the letter carefully and held it. What do we do, he said. And she had been waiting for that question. Not because she hadn't known the answer, but because she'd needed him to ask it. Needed it to be we before she said what came next. Needed to know that she was standing beside him in this. Not in front of him or behind him. We don't show him what we know, she said. Not yet. We let him keep believing he has the advantage. I need 3 more days with the books I want everything documented. Every discrepancy, every irregular signature, every account entry that doesn't match the records it should match. I want it built so solidly that no lawyer in Kentucky can argue with it. He was nodding slowly. And then he said, and then she said we let him make his move. Nathaniel looked at her. That's a risk, he said. Yes, she said. But a cornered man gets unpredictable. A man who thinks he's winning stays on his chosen ground. I'd rather face him on terrain we've already mapped than somewhere we haven't. He considered that. You've done this before, he said. Thought this way. I grew up in a merchant's house, she said. In rooms full of men who thought a girl keeping their accounts was a piece of furniture. You learn to think ahead. You learn to let people underestimate you. And you learn when to let them make their move before you make yours. He was looking at her with that focused, directed attention again, the kind that took things fully before responding. But it was different now than it had been in the carriage 2 days ago. Less assessment. Something more like recognition. My grandfather would have liked you, he said. It came out quieter than he intended, she thought. She didn't know what to say to that, so she said, let's make sure there's still something here for his memory to be proud of. Nathaniel straightened, squared his shoulders. The particular kind of squaring that means a decision has been made and a person is done grieving and starting to move. 3 more days, he said. 3 more days, she agreed. She turned to go. Olivia. She stopped. He was looking at the folded letter in his hand. Not at her. At the letter, and at something past it that she couldn't see. I'm sorry, he said, that the first week of your marriage has been this. She thought about the cold stone floor. About the bucket. About the 4 years of raw hands and early mornings and rooms she moved through invisibly. About the moment a contract had landed beside her bucket and she had stood up and said no and everything had tilted on its axis. Don't be, she said. This is the first week of my life in 4 years where I've felt like I was standing upright. He looked up from the letter. She held his gaze for a moment. Then she walked back toward the house. Through the bare herb beds and the cold morning air. With a letter full of someone's betrayal tucked safely in her memory and 3 days' worth of work ahead of her and, somewhere underneath all of it, the steady, quiet, unfamiliar feeling of being exactly where she was supposed to be. Behind her, she heard him say something under his breath. She didn't catch the words, but she heard the tone. and it sounded like a man who was reconsidering everything he'd thought he knew about what he needed. 3 days passed the way dangerous things often do quietly. On the surface, while everything underneath moved fast and hard. Olivia worked. She worked the way she had learned to work in her father's house, methodically. Without rushing, without letting urgency push her into mistakes. She built the case the way you build something meant to last. One solid piece at a time, each one tested before the next was added. By the end of the first day, she had 7 documented discrepancies. By the end of the second, she had 14. By the morning of the third, she had something better than discrepancies. She had a pattern so clear and consistent that any competent lawyer in Kentucky would see it in under 10 minutes. Victor Caldwell had been moving money out of Whitmore estate accounts for 6 months. Not in large amounts, never large enough to trigger obvious alarm. Small amounts always, shifted through accounts he controlled into a separate holding account, registered under a business name she'd had to dig 3 layers deep to connect to him. The name was Caldwell Land Management. It had been registered in Lexington 8 months ago. 2 months before Victor arrived at the estate, he had registered the company before he came. He had planned where the money was going before he started taking it. She sat with that for a moment when she found it, let it settle fully. Then she wrote it down in plain language at the top of her summary page. Because plain language was harder to argue with than legal terminology. And she wanted this to be impossible to argue with. She was finishing the last page of documentation on the morning of the third day when she heard raised voices downstairs. She recognized one of them immediately. She put down her pen and went to find out what had happened. She found it in the main hall. Victor was standing near the front door with his coat on and his traveling bag at his feet, and an expression she had not seen on him before, not the careful calculation she'd grown accustomed to reading. But something rawer and harder, and underneath it all. Frightened. Thomas was standing 6 feet away with the particular stillness of a man who has just heard something alarming and is deciding what to do about it. Nathaniel was at the foot of the stairs. "Say it again," Nathaniel said. His voice was very quiet, that particular quiet that was more dangerous than shouting. "I said," Victor repeated, and his voice was controlled. But she could hear the effort it cost him, that you've made a serious mistake trusting that woman. And I have documentation to prove it. Olivia stopped at the top of the staircase. Neither man had seen her yet. "What documentation?" Nathaniel said. Victor reached into his coat and produced a folded paper. A record of transactions made from the household account over the past 3 days. Unauthorized withdrawals, small amounts, the kind someone makes when they're testing how much they can take without being noticed. He held it out. "Your wife, Nathaniel, the woman you married in 6 hours, and handed access to your financial records." The hall was absolutely silent. Thomas looked at the floor. Nathaniel looked at the paper. "Did not take it. Where did you get that?" he said. "I've been watching. Someone had to." "You were too trusting to see what was in front of you." "She asked for those records herself," Nathaniel said. "Openly. Through Thomas. Because she wanted you to think it was innocent," Victor said. He took a step forward, the paper in his hand, the traveling bag at his feet. Everything about him arranged to look like a man reluctantly delivering necessary truth. "I know this is hard to hear, but think about it, Nathaniel. Where did she come from? What do you actually know about her? She appeared here 2 years ago with a letter of reference you never verified. She maneuvered you into a marriage in a single morning. And the moment she had your name and your legal access to these accounts." She started. "Stop." It wasn't Nathaniel who said it. Both men looked up. Olivia was standing at the top of the stairs with a leather portfolio under her arm and that was completely, deliberately calm, the way water is calm on the surface when everything beneath it is moving with tremendous force. She walked down the stairs, 1 step at a time, not hurrying. Because hurrying was what people did when they were afraid. And she was not afraid. She was done being afraid. She reached the bottom of the stairs and looked at Victor directly. "May I see that?" she said, nodding at the paper in his hand. He hesitated for one fraction of a second. Then he held it out. Because refusing would have looked like weakness, and a man like Victor Caldwell would accept almost any cost rather than look weak. She took it. Read it. It was a fabricated record. She could see that in under 30 seconds the dates didn't align with the actual account book entries she'd been working from. The account numbers referenced a fund that didn't exist in the estate's current structure. And the handwriting, though clearly designed to look like a ledger entry, used a date format that nobody who had actually kept accounts in Kentucky would use. It was a good fake, produced quickly under pressure, by someone who had assumed she wouldn't know enough to catch the details. She looked up from the paper. "This references account number 417, she said. "Whitmore Estate doesn't have an account number 417. The household operating accounts run from 420 through 428. They were renumbered in the spring of 1810 when the Lexington Bank restructured its records." She set the paper down on the hall table. Carefully, like she was setting down something fragile she didn't want to damage. Whoever made this document didn't know that. Victor's face didn't move. But his eyes did. "Furthermore," she said, opening the leather portfolio, "the date format on this record uses a European notation day. Month year. Kentucky banking records have used month, day, year since 1805. A local accountant would know that. Someone who came here from, where was it, Mr. Caldwell? Virginia. Would know that too if they'd actually worked in local accounts." She turned to Nathaniel. "I have something for you to look at." She handed him the portfolio. He opened it. What he held was 62 pages of documented evidence. Every discrepancy, every irregular entry, every account anomaly, cross-referenced against the original bank records and the estate's historical accounts for comparison. The letter from Edmund's lawyer, the company registration document for Caldwell Land Management, the timeline showing that the company was registered 2 months before Victor arrived at the estate. A clear, plain-language summary at the front that laid out what each document proved and what, taken together, they demonstrated. She had stayed up until 2 in the morning on the second night, making sure every page was right. Nathaniel read the summary page. She watched his face and saw the moment it landed the full weight of it. The completeness of it, the way it turned suspicion into fact. He lowered the portfolio. He looked at Victor, and for the first time in the 6 months Victor had been in this house, Nathaniel Whitmore looked at his uncle without trust. The absence of it was visible, a space where something had been and wasn't anymore. And it was devastating in the quiet way that only the loss of old faith manages to be. 6 months, Nathaniel said. Victor said nothing. "You came here and I let you into every room of this house," Nathaniel said. "Every account, every decision. I thought you were helping." His voice did not shake. It stayed very level, which was somehow worse than if it had shaken. "I told you things I haven't told anyone. About the debt. About how scared I was of losing this place. About what my grandfather built." He stopped. "And you were using it." "Nathaniel, don't." The single word cut clean through whatever Victor had been preparing to say. "Don't explain it to me. Don't tell me your reasons." "I don't want to hear your reasons." Victor looked at him for a long moment. Then his gaze moved to Olivia. And what lived in that gaze now was not the careful calculation she'd been reading for a week. It was simpler than that and uglier, the specific anger of a man who has lost to someone he had dismissed. "You have no idea what you've done," he said to her. "Low, precise, this house, this estate, the people in it. You don't know this world, and you don't belong in it, and when the county hears that Nathaniel Whitmore is defending a housemaid's word over his own family, I'll tell you what the county is going to hear," Nathaniel said. Victor stopped. "They're going to hear that Victor Caldwell attempted to defraud his nephew's estate over a period of 6 months, Nathaniel said. "They're going to hear it from a lawyer, and they're going to see 62 pages of documentation that my wife built in 3 days from records you thought nobody was looking at. He took one step forward. And then they can decide whose word they're taking. The hall was completely still. Thomas, who had been standing quietly throughout all of this, looked at Olivia with an expression she would remember for a long time, something between profound relief and a respect so genuine it was almost painful. Victor picked up his traveling bag. He did it without a word. Without another look at either of them. The particular exit of a man who has lost and knows it, and is preserving the only thing he has left, which is the decision not to collapse publicly. He walked to the door. At the threshold he stopped. He didn't turn around. Edmund would be ashamed, he said, of all of this. Edmund, Nathaniel said quietly, built this estate with his hands for 40 years. He would want it standing, and it's going to keep standing. A pause. You can see yourself out. The door closed. The sound of it was very final. Nobody moved for a moment. Then Margaret appeared in the kitchen doorway. She had clearly been there for the last portion of this, and had the stretch of a woman who had been waiting a very long time for exactly this, and she looked at Olivia and said simply, Lord Almighty. Olivia sat down on the bottom step of the staircase. Just sat down right there, because her legs had decided they were done performing steadiness and she was too tired to argue with them. Nathaniel looked at her. Are you all right? He said. Yes, she said. Give me a minute. He sat down on the step beside her. Not across the hall, not standing over her, right beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched, and he looked at the closed front door, and she looked at the closed front door, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Thomas quietly, professionally, found something important to do in the east corridor. Margaret went back to the kitchen. 62 pages, Nathaniel said. I wanted it to be complete, she said. You stayed up 2 nights. I sleep better when there's work to do, she said. Always have. He was quiet for a moment. The fake document he produced you caught the account number in under a minute. Under 30 seconds, she said. Then, catching his expression, I'm not saying that to be impressive. I'm saying it because he made it. He made it in a hurry and he made it without checking the details, because he assumed I wouldn't know the details to check. She paused. He looked at me and decided I was decorative. That was his mistake. It was, Nathaniel said. A beat of quiet. I have to go to Lexington, he said. Today. Take this to a lawyer and start the formal process. He looked at the portfolio. Still in his hand to be public. People will know. I know, she said. It'll be difficult for you, he said. More difficult than it already has been. People in this county have strong feelings about family loyalty. And there are going to be those who look at this and decide that he stopped. Chose words carefully. That you manipulated your way into a position to damage a man you had no right to damage. She thought about Mrs. Hargrove's visit. About the sharp-faced woman who hadn't shaken her hand. About the word appropriate delivered like a verdict. Let them, she said. He looked at her. Let them talk, she said. I spent 4 years being afraid of what people would say. What they'd think. Whether they'd accept the situation I was in or blame me for it. I spent 4 years making myself small so that I'd be less of a target. She looked at him steadily. I am done making myself small, Nathaniel. It was the first time she had used his name. Just his name, without the Mr., without the formal distance. They both noticed. You should take Thomas with you to Lexington, she said. After a moment. He's been watching this for 6 months, and he'll be a reliable witness. The letter from Edmund's lawyer, keep that separate from the portfolio. In case anyone tries to argue the rest of the documentation was produced by a biased party. He stared at her. He stopped. We haven't even finished the conversation about the town talking about you and you're already. I can care about more than one thing at a time, she said simply. He laughed. Actually laughed, not the almost laugh she'd seen before. Not the ghost of one, but a real one, surprised out of him. Brief and genuine and completely unguarded, it changed his face entirely. That laugh made him look, for just a moment, younger than 35. lighter than the weight of what he'd been carrying. She found herself smiling, couldn't help it. Then they were both sitting on the stairs of Whitmore Estate on a cold winter morning, smiling at each other, and it was the most normal thing that had happened in the entire week. "Thomas," Nathaniel said, raising his voice. Thomas materialized from the east corridor instantly. "Sir, get the carriage ready. We're going to Lexington, yes." "Sir," a pause. "Shall I pack the portfolio, Mrs.?" "Whitmore will tell you what to take," Nathaniel said. And stood up. He held out his hand to her, the same as at the courthouse automatic. Unthought, she took it the same as before. He pulled her to her feet and didn't immediately let go. She looked at their hands for a moment. He did too. Then he released her and went to get his coat, and she went to give Thomas his instructions. And that was that. Except it wasn't that, and they both knew it wasn't that. And neither of them said so. The trip to Lexington and back took most of the day. Olivia stayed at the estate. She spent the morning doing something she had not done since the morning of the wedding. She moved through the house not to look at documents, but simply to see it. Room by room, the east parlor with its faded curtains and good bones. The library where 3 of the shelves had warped in old damp and been badly repaired. The kitchen where Margaret ran a tight and warm operation that was honestly the most functional thing about the whole estate. The south study where Nathaniel had told her about his grandfather with that specific quality of ashamed love in his voice. She walked the house and she thought about what it needed. Not financially, she knew what it needed financially. She thought about what it needed to become a place that felt lived in and cared for, rather than merely large and expensive and held together by habit. She thought about the school. It had been one of the ideas that had been forming quietly in the back of her mind since she'd talked to Ellen about what she'd expected from her life, and Ellen had said, with that heartbreaking simplicity, that she'd expected to be a servant until she married a servant, and that would be that. Ellen could read but barely, could not do sums, had been at Whitmore Estate since she was 14 and had learned only what the work required. Olivia thought about her own father's library, about the way access to knowledge had made the difference between her being able to survive what happened to her and not surviving it. About what it would have meant to Ellen, or Mary, or a dozen children on the farm surrounding the estate. To have someone teach them to read properly, to do accounts, to understand contracts. She found Margaret in the kitchen in the afternoon and said, "I want to talk to you about something." Margaret looked at her. "Is everything all right?" "Everything is fine," Olivia said. "I want to talk about the children." Margaret blinked. "Whose children?" "All of them," Olivia said. "The workers' children. The farmhands' families. Ellen's younger brother. The 2 boys from the Hanson farm who come to help with the harvest and can't sign their own names." She sat down at the kitchen work table, her table. Still, in her mind, in the way things become yours when you've spent enough mornings at them. "I want to start a school." Margaret was very still for a moment. Then she sat down across from her. "Here," she said. "The east parlor," Olivia said. "The curtains need replacing anyway, and the room gets good light in the mornings. We'd need desks. I can get those made locally. It's not expensive. Books, slates, chalk. A teacher, ideally, though I can do it myself until we find the right person." Margaret was looking at her with an expression that was doing several things at once. "Does Mr. Whitmore know about this?" "Not yet," she said. "I wanted to think it through first. Make sure it was actually possible before I brought it to him." "You built 62 pages of legal documentation in 3 days," Margaret said dryly. "And you wanted to make sure a school was possible." Olivia smiled. "That's different." "How? That was about saving something," she said. "This is about building something. Building things is harder than saving them. You have to want it more." Margaret looked at her for a long moment with those warm, practical eyes. "You're going to be something, Olivia Whitmore," she said. Quietly, like a statement of fact, not a compliment. "I already am something," Olivia said. "I just needed the room to be it." Nathaniel came back from Lexington at 7:30, with Thomas beside him, and the expression of a man who has accomplished something difficult and is still coming down from it. He found Olivia in the library, where she had been cataloging which books needed repair and which needed replacing. Because the library was a disaster and it bothered her, and she'd had 3 hours with nothing more pressing to do. He stopped in the doorway. "What are you doing?" he said. "Making a list," she said. "This shelf has water damage. These 4 need rebinding." She held up a slim volume. "These need to be thrown away because they're beyond saving, and keeping things past the point of usefulness is just sentiment." He came into the room, looked at the stacks she'd sorted, looked at her list. "Did the lawyer?" "Tell me first," she said. So he did. Standing in the middle of the damaged library, still in his traveling coat, he told her everything. The lawyer's reaction to the portfolio immediate. Thorough, furious on Nathaniel's behalf. The steps already set in motion to freeze the Caldwell Land Management account before any more funds could be moved. The legal process that would follow, which would be neither fast nor easy, but which the lawyer had said, with considerable confidence, would go only one way given the quality of the documentation. He asked who put the portfolio together, Nathaniel said. "What did you, Ted?" "My wife." In 3 days he looked at her. He asked me to repeat that end. He said he wished she worked for him. She laughed softly. "We're going to get most of it back," Nathaniel said. The money Victor moved. It won't be immediate, but the lawyer thinks the account can be recovered substantially. And the secondary clause Victor was planning to use the one in the letter from grandfather's lawyer. The lawyer says it's legally questionable. Edmund's will was filed in a specific way that may actually override it. He needs to research it further, but he was cautiously confident. She sat with that for a moment. All of it. The feeling of a thing that had been threatening to collapse being slowly, carefully pulled back from the edge. "Good," she said. He looked at her. "That's all you've got? Good?" "I don't know what else to say," she said honestly. "I'm very relieved and also extremely tired, and also I have 17 more books to sort before I'll feel like this room is under control." He looked at the stacks. Sat down on the floor, just sat down, right on the floor. Cross-legged, which was not remotely what she'd expected, and picked up the nearest book. "Tell me the system," he said. She looked at him. "For the sorting," he said. "Tell me the system and I'll help." She blinked, then she pointed. "That pile is repair, that one is replacement, that one is discard. If you're not sure, hand it to me." He nodded. They worked in companionable silence for 20 minutes. She sorted. He handled the books and placed them in piles and asked her occasionally, handing over a questionable volume, whether it went here or there. It was the most ordinary 20 minutes she had spent in years. "I want to start a school," she said. He looked up from a crumbling almanac. "In the East Parlor," she said, "for the workers' children and the farm families nearby. Reading, arithmetic, basic contract literacy. There are children on this estate who can't sign their own names." That she stopped. Chose the word precisely. "That's not all right with me." He was looking at her with that expression again. The one she'd been cataloging without meaning to all week. Steady. Something in it that kept getting incrementally warmer. "All right," he said. "All right," she said. "That's it?" "No questions." "I've got questions," he said, "but I'm asking them in the right order. And the first one was whether you were serious. And you clearly are." "So all right." She looked at him for a moment. "The East Parlor gets good morning light," she said. "I know it does," he said. "We'll need desks. I can source them locally. I know a carpenter in town," he said. "Good man, fair price in books. There are good ones in this room," he said. "The ones in the repair pile once they're fixed. And I can order more from Lexington." He turned the crumbling almanac over in his hands. "My grandfather taught himself to read at 32 years old," he said. From a Bible and a shipping manifest, a pause. He would have liked this idea. "Very much." "Nathaniel," she said. He looked at her. She had been thinking about how to say the next thing for 3 days. Turning it over. finding the right words for something that didn't come easily to her. Because she was a person who dealt in precision, and this particular thing was not precise. It was something that lived just past the edge of precision, in the territory of things that were true but not measurable. "I didn't marry you to save the estate," she said. "I want you to know that. It wasn't the plan. I didn't have a plan. I had a contract on the floor next to my bucket and a choice to make." She held his gaze. "But if I had to choose again, knowing what I know now, knowing how this week would go," she paused, "I'd choose the same." He was very still. "What I mean," she said carefully, "is that I am glad that it was you." Another pause, and that I signed. He looked at her for a long moment. Sitting on the floor of his damaged library surrounded by piles of books, in his traveling coat, 35 years old and tired and recently unburdened of a 6-month betrayal, and apparently also somewhat undone by something she'd just said. Because there was something happening in his face that she didn't have a word for, but recognized as significant. "Olivia," he said. "Yes, I put a contract on the floor next to your bucket," he said. "And you still chose to stay. You picked it back up," she said. He shook his head slowly. Not in disagreement, in the way a person shakes their head when something is almost too much to process. "I have spent 35 years," he said slowly, "making decisions based on what things were worth. What land was worth. What agreements were worth. What names were worth." He stopped. I'm not sure I've ever made a decision based on who a person was." "You held the contract out properly," she said. "The second time. That's a very low bar," he said. "It was also the moment I decided to sign," she said. He looked at her, that steady, dark-eyed, increasingly unguarded look. "I'm going to do better than that," he said. "Going forward. I want you to know that. I don't know yet what that looks like in full. But I know it starts with not treating you like a solution I got lucky with." She thought about standing up from cold stone floors, about raw hands and early mornings and the feeling of being invisible in rooms she kept clean, about the carriage ride and the courthouse and the corridor and the letter and the staircase and 62 pages and a fake document she dismantled in 30 seconds and a school she was going to build. In the east parlor, where the morning light came in. She thought about all of it. "You know what I want," she said. "Tell me," he said. "I want to be your equal," she said. "Not your employee, not your charity case, not the woman you got lucky with. Your equal. Someone whose name you think of when a decision needs making. Not because I happen to be useful, but because you trust my judgment." She met his eyes steadily. "Can you give me that?" He held her gaze for a long, honest, undefended moment, "I reckon," he said slowly. "That I already do." The fire had burned low in the library grate. Outside the window, the night had come in fully dark and cold and wide. Inside, the room was warm and full of sorted books and the particular quality of silence that settles between two people when something true has just been said out loud for the first time. She turned back to the last pile. "There are still 6 books to sort," she said. "Hand them over," he said. And they sat on the floor of the library together in the warm dark and finished the work. The news about Victor Caldwell reached the county in the way all significant news reached it, faster than anyone planned and with more detail than anyone intended. By the following Monday, 3 days after the confrontation in the hall, Olivia could tell by the way people moved around her at the supply merchant in town that the story had traveled. The merchant himself was carefully, professionally neutral, which told her everything. 2 women near the dry goods section went quiet when she walked past, and then started talking again at a slightly higher volume about something entirely unrelated, which told her even more. She bought what she needed. She kept her back straight. She did not hurry. On the way out, she passed a man she didn't recognize, older, thick-built, the look of a farmer about him, who touched the brim of his hat and said, "Ma'am," in the direct, genuine way that meant he knew who she was and had decided he was going to be decent about it, regardless of what anyone else was doing. She nodded back. It was a small thing. She stored it the way she stored everything. The carriage ride back to the estate was quiet. Thomas drove. She sat with her hands folded and thought about what came next. Because what came next was the part she'd been turning over in her mind since the night in the library. Since Nathaniel had said "I reckon I already do" with that undefended quality in his voice that she was still not quite sure what to do with. The estate's financial situation was improving but slowly. The way real recovery always moved, not in a dramatic reversal but in a series of small corrections. Each one slightly better than the last. The lawyer in Lexington had moved to freeze the Caldwell accounts. The recovered funds would come back in stages over the next several months. The secondary clause in Edmund's will was being anched through proper legal channels. None of it was finished. None of it was certain. But it was moving forward. And moving forward was all she had ever asked of anything. What she hadn't anticipated, what she was still adjusting to. Quietly, in the private hours of the morning, was what was happening inside the house at the same time. Something had shifted between her and Nathaniel the night in the library. She couldn't name it precisely, but she felt it in the changed quality of their interactions, the way he had started seeking her out in the evenings. Not with estate business, but with something closer to company. The way he asked her opinion on things before he decided them. Not as a courtesy, but as a genuine request for her judgment. The way he had looked at her 2 mornings ago, when she'd walked into the south study and found him already there reading. And he had looked up and said simply, "Good morning," with that quietly unguarded look. And she had felt something move in her chest that she was very carefully not examining too closely yet. She was not a woman who moved fast with things that mattered. She had learned the hard way that the things most worth having were also the things most easily ruined by rushing. Thomas pulled the carriage up the front drive, and she stepped down and walked inside. And the first thing she heard was raised voices from the direction of the east parlor. She followed the sound. Ellen was in the center of the parlor. Red-faced and close to tears but holding her ground. Facing a woman Olivia didn't recognize, well-dressed. Mid-40s, the kind of rigid posture that came from years of being told it was a moral quality. 2 children stood slightly behind the woman, a boy of about 10 and a girl younger. Both watching Ellen with wide eyes. "This is not," the woman was saying, in the clear carrying voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "An appropriate use of this room." "I don't know who gave you permission." "I did," Olivia said. Everyone turned. The woman looked at her, took her in the traveling dress. The lack of jewelry, the plainness of her appearance relative to the grandness of the room she'd just walked into, and recalibrated in a way that was not quite deferential. "And you are?" "Olivia Whitmore," she said. "This is my house." A pause, the recalibration again. Faster this time. "Mrs. Whitmore," the woman said, shifting into a register that was careful and formally respectful without being warm. "I'm Mrs. Prescott. My husband farms the East Quarter. We've been neighbors of Whitmore Estate for 11 years, Mrs. Prescott," Olivia said. "It's good to meet you. What brings you by? I heard you were starting some kind of school, Mrs. Prescott said. "For the workers' children." She said it without overt disapproval, but with the specific neutrality of someone who had disapproval banked and available. "That's right," Olivia said. "We're starting with reading and arithmetic. Basic contract literacy as they get older." She looked at the 2 children behind Mrs. Prescott. "Yes," Mrs. Prescott said. "James and Clara, how old?" Olivia looked at James. "Can you read, James?" The boy looked at his mother first. Then at Olivia. "Some," he said carefully. "Some," she repeated. "What some?" "I can read words if they're not too long," he said. "Big words I have to sound out slow." "That's honest," she said. "I appreciate honest." She looked at Mrs. Prescott. "I'd like to have him here on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, if you're willing. Clara too." Mrs. Prescott looked at her for a moment. "You're teaching them yourself?" "Until I find the right teacher," she said. "Yes, you're the mistress of Whitmore Estate, Mrs. Prescott said, and the statement sat somewhere between a question and an objection. I'm also someone who believes children should be able to read their own contracts before they sign them, Olivia said. Those two things are not in conflict. Another pause. Mrs. Prescott was doing the kind of reassessment that takes a moment because it requires setting aside what you came in expecting and looking at what's actually in front of you. James tugged his mother's sleeve. I want to come, he said. Low but clear. Mrs. Prescott looked down at her son. Then back at Olivia, and something shifted in her expression, the rigid posture not softening exactly, but the quality of the rigidity changing, from defensive to something more like guarded willingness. Tuesday and Thursday, she said. We'll see how it goes. She left with her children. And Ellen exhaled so loudly it was almost comical. And Olivia sat down in the nearest chair because her legs had decided again that they'd done enough. She came in like she owned the place, Ellen said. Still flushed. I didn't know what. You held your ground, Olivia said. That was the right thing. Don't apologize for it. Ellen blinked. I wasn't going to apologize. Good, Olivia said. Don't start. The school opened the following Tuesday with 7 children. 2 slates, a borrowed primer, and Ellen sitting in the corner ostensibly to help but actually, Olivia suspected, because she wanted to learn alongside the children and was too proud to say so directly. Olivia taught for 3 hours. She had not taught before and discovered, within the first 20 minutes, that teaching was significantly harder than keeping accounts. Accounts held still. Children did not. But James Prescott read his first complete sentence by the end of the first hour. Slowly, and with enormous concentration, his finger tracing under each word, the man went to the river and found his horse, and when he finished he looked up with an expression of such unguarded triumph that Olivia felt something open up in her chest that she hadn't felt in a very long time. That night at supper she told Nathaniel about it. She had not been expecting to talk about it. She had been going over accounts in her head, thinking about the month-end reconciliation, but he had asked how the first day of school went. And she had started talking, and 20 minutes later, she looked up from her soup and realized she had been describing James reading his first sentence in detail that she hadn't known she'd retained. And Nathaniel was leaning on one elbow watching her with that expression. And she stopped. Nothing, he said. Keep going. I've been talking for 20 minutes, I know, he said. Keep going. She looked at him for a moment. You're doing that thing, she said. What thing? Where you look at me like you're cataloging something. He straightened slightly. I'm listening, he said. You're doing both, she said. He didn't deny it. He picked up his fork. What happened after James read the sentence, he said. She looked at him for another moment. Then she picked up her own fork and kept going. The twist she hadn't seen coming arrived on a Thursday morning. 11 days after Victor left, it came in the form of a letter, delivered by a writer from Lexington who handed it to Thomas with a sealed expression that told Olivia, watching from the top of the stairs, that whatever was inside it was significant. Thomas brought it to Nathaniel in the South study. She was in the East parlor with the morning students when she heard Nathaniel's voice, not the words. Just the tone, which was the controlled quiet that she had learned, meant something serious, and then the sound of the study door opening and his footsteps in the hall. Faster than usual, he appeared in the parlor doorway. She looked at his face and said, immediately, Ellen. Can you take over for a few minutes? Ellen, who had graduated from ostensible helper to genuine assistant in 11 days, straightened and said, yes, ma'am, with a calm that Olivia found quietly satisfying. She followed Nathaniel into the corridor. He handed her the letter without preamble. She read it, then she read it again. It was from Edmund Whitmore's original lawyer, not the Lexington lawyer handling the current case, but an older firm, the one that had drafted Edmund's will 12 years ago. The letter informed Nathaniel that an additional document had been located in the firm's archived files, misfiled at the time of Edmund's death and only recently discovered during a comprehensive records review. The document was a codicil to Edmund's will, handwritten, properly witnessed, dated 3 months before Edmund died. It stated, in Edmund's own words, that if the marriage clause was fulfilled under circumstances of necessity rather than choice, and if the spouse chosen demonstrated, this was the word Edmund had used, demonstrated genuine contribution to the welfare of Whitmore estate within the first year of marriage, the marriage clause settlement was to be considered permanently fulfilled, and all secondary inheritance provisions voided. All secondary inheritance provision, including the one Victor had been planning to use. She lowered the letter. He knew, Nathaniel said quietly. Grandfather knew the clause might be used in a desperate situation. So he wrote a protection into it. He wrote it so that whoever you married under pressure, if she proved herself, all the alternate claims died, she said. Yes, she thought about Edmund Whitmore, a man she had never met, who had taught himself to read at 32 from a Bible and a shipping manifest, who had built 1,500 acres from raw Kentucky ground, who had put a clause in his will, apparently, because he understood that desperate circumstances sometimes produced unexpected people. He was protecting you, she said. He was protecting whoever was worth protecting, Nathaniel said. She was quiet for a moment. This closes it, she said. Legally, Victor has no claim. The secondary provision is voided. Yes, Nathaniel said. And the codicil's witness signatures, are they verifiable? The lawyer says yes. 2 witnesses, both still living. She breathed out slowly. Folded the letter carefully. Olivia, Nathaniel said. She looked up. He was standing in the corridor with the morning light on his face, and that expression, not the guarded one, not the calculating one, but the specific one she had catalogued and stored, and kept examining from different angles, because she wasn't sure yet what to make of it. Demonstrated genuine contribution, he said. That's what Grandfather wrote. Yes, she said. 62 pages of documentation in 3 days, he said. A school in the East Parlor, the estate accounts in better shape than they've been in 2 years. He paused. You know what I think about when I read that phrase? Tell me, she said quietly. The morning you told me no, he said. On the corridor floor, he held her gaze. That was the moment, before any of the rest of it. That was when I knew you were different, from what I'd assumed, from what I'd been looking for. He stopped, started again. More carefully. I wasn't looking for someone like you. I want to be honest about that. I was looking for a solution. And then there you were telling me no, and reading a contract in a hallway and negotiating clauses from memory, and I didn't know what to do with that. She waited. I still don't always know what to do with it, he said. I'm learning. But I want you to know. He stopped again. His jaw worked. The expression of a man who is not accustomed to saying precise things about imprecise feelings and is doing it anyway because it matters. I want you to know that I see you. Not what you can do for this estate, though God knows you've done enough of that. You, the person. He held her gaze. I'm sorry it took me this long to say it plainly. The corridor was quiet. She thought about 4 years of being invisible, about rooms she'd moved through without anyone looking up, about contracts on floors and 30 days in a single traveling bag, and all the mornings she'd been the first one awake in a house that didn't belong to her. She thought about standing up from Cold Stone. It doesn't take long, she said quietly. When it's real. Something in his face opened completely for just a moment, no calculation, no control, no performance of any kind, and then he did something she hadn't expected. He reached out and took her hand. Both hands. The way you take someone's hands when you're trying to say something that words are too small for. She looked down at their joined hands, at her hands, which knew the shape of this house from floor to ceiling, which had held scrub brushes and ledger pens and a lawyer's portfolio and a piece of chalk and an old letter that had exposed a year of betrayal. His hands, which had held a contract and placed it on a floor and then picked it back up and held it out properly. Equal, he said. It was the word she had used, returned to her now like something he had been holding carefully, waiting for the right moment. Equal. He squeezed her hands once, gently, and let go, and that was enough, more than enough. It was the kind of moment that didn't need more words added to it. And they both knew that, and they stood in the quiet corridor for one more breath, and then she said, "I need to go back to the school," and he said, "I know," and she went. The county's opinion of Olivia Whitmore shifted the way opinions in small communities shift, not all at once. Not cleanly, but in a series of small individual decisions that accumulated over time into something that resembled consensus. Mrs. Hargrove came back. She brought her granddaughter, who was 9 years old and had been tutored privately but was, Mrs. Hargrove said with characteristic directness, learning very little. "Put her with your students," she said. If that's acceptable. It was the closest Mrs. Hargrove had come to asking rather than telling, and Olivia accepted it in the spirit it was offered. The sharp-faced woman from Mrs. Hargrove's first visit never came. Some people didn't, and Olivia had made her peace with that. The farmer who had touched his hat in town, his name was Daniel Reeve. She learned sent his 2 sons on the second week of school. He sent a note with them that said simply, "Thank you for the thing you're doing. It matters." She kept the note in the writing desk in her room, which was beginning to feel less like a room she'd been assigned and more like a room that was actually hers. The legal proceedings against Victor moved forward. Slowly, as legal things always moved, but forward. The recovered funds began coming back in installments. The estate accounts steadied. Not dramatically, there was no single moment of miraculous rescue, but consistently. Which was better, because consistency was something you could build on. Nathaniel started doing something that she noticed but didn't comment on. He started including her in conversations that he hadn't before with the estate's farmhands, with the neighboring landowners who came to discuss shared land boundaries, with the Lexington lawyer when he made his monthly reports. Not as an observer, as a participant. My wife's opinion on this became a phrase she heard regularly enough that she stopped being startled by it. He also started doing something smaller that meant more. He asked how the school was going, every evening. Not as a pleasantry, she could tell the difference by now, but because he actually wanted to know. He asked which children were advancing. He asked what they were reading. He asked what she needed and then got it without waiting to be asked twice. One evening he came into the east parlor after the students had gone and found her reorganizing the desks the carpenter had delivered, proper ones. Solid and plain, exactly right, and he picked up the other end of the desk she was moving without being asked and moved it to where she pointed. "James Prescott's mother came to see me today," he said. She looked at him. What did she want? "To tell me that her son read her a full letter last week," he said. A letter from her sister in Virginia. She said it was the first time she'd had a letter read to her by her own child, and not a hired man. He set the desk down. She cried when she told me. Olivia straightened. She also said, Nathaniel continued carefully, that she was sorry for how she treated you that first day. She doesn't need, she said, to tell you specifically, he said. She wanted you to know she was sorry, not generally. Specifically. Olivia was quiet for a moment. Something moved through her. Warm and complicated and not entirely comfortable. Because she was still learning how to receive things gracefully. Which was harder than it sounded when you'd spent years in the habit of needing nothing. That was good of her, she said. It was, he agreed. He looked at the rows of desks, at the primer on the front table, open to the page they'd been working on, at the slates lined up against the wall. How many children, she said. Mrs. Hargrove's granddaughter makes 15 next Monday. And Ellen? She smiled slightly. Ellen thinks she's helping, she said. She's actually learning. I haven't told her, I know. He laughed, that real laugh. The unguarded one that changed his face. Why not? Because she'll stop coming if she thinks it's for herself, she said. She's more comfortable being useful than being helped. I understand that. She paused. I'm working on it with her. He looked at her. Are you working on it with yourself too? She met his eyes. He was not asking idly. I'm trying, she said honestly. He nodded, just nodded without pressing it further. Which she appreciated more than she could say. The moment that changed the county's opinion in a single afternoon, the moment that could not be quietly dismissed or reinterpreted, came 4 weeks after Victor left. On a Friday that had started like any other Friday. A man named Harlan Burks arrived at Whitmore Estate just before noon. She had not met him before, but she knew the name. Everyone in the county knew the name. Because Harlan Burks owned the second largest land holding in the county after Whitmore, was on the board of the Lexington Bank, and had been a close associate of Edmund Whitmore in the old days. He was in the way of such men in small communities, someone whose opinion functioned almost like policy. He asked to see Nathaniel. Nathaniel was in the North Fields. A farmhand had sent word of a problem with the irrigation channel, and Thomas told Burks so apologetically. Burks said he would wait. He settled in the front parlor with the patience of a man who was not accustomed to waiting, but had decided this particular wait was worthwhile. Olivia brought him tea herself. She did it because Margaret was occupied and Ellen was teaching, and Thomas was managing 3 things at once, and because she had decided, sometime in the last 4 weeks, that she was done making small calculations about whether a task was beneath her position or above it. Work was work. It needed doing. Burks looked up when she came in. Looked at the tray. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said. "Mr. Burks," she said. "Nathaniel's been sent for." "He shouldn't be long." She set the tray down, started to go. "Sit down," Burks said. She turned. He was looking at her with the direct, assessing gaze of a man who had spent 50 years sizing people up quickly and trusted his own readings. "I came to talk to Nathaniel," he said, "but I reckon you'll do." She sat. "I knew Edmund Whitmore for 30 years, he said. Watched him build this place from dirt and stubbornness. Watched him make mistakes and fix them, and make different mistakes and fix those too. He wasn't a perfect man, but he was an honest one." She waited. "I heard what happened with Victor," he said. "Heard the full of it. Or close enough. Heard about the documentation your wife built." He looked at her. "That was you. 62 pages, he said. "Yes. In 2.5, she said. Then catching herself, "Yes." Something moved in Burks's expression. Not quite a smile, but the precursor to one. "Edmund would have liked you," he said. She had heard those words before, from Nathaniel in the library. They landed differently now. Heavier, more real, somehow. Coming from someone who had actually known Edmund. "I've been talking to people in town," Burks said. "About what you're doing here." She said. "And I want to offer you something," he said. "My wife was a school teacher before we married. She's been wanting something useful to do for years. And I haven't known what to do about that." He looked at Olivia directly. "She could teach 3 days a week. Proper curriculum. Reading, writing, arithmetic, geography. She knows how to do it right." Olivia looked at him. "She'd be teaching servants' children," she said carefully. "Workers' children. Farmers' kids who come in with dirty boots." "I know what she'd be teaching," Burks said. "That's why she'd want to do it." The words sat in the room for a moment. "Tell her," Olivia said, "that she's welcome Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday, and that we need someone who knows geography, because I've been bluffing on that particular subject for 3 weeks. Burks did smile then fully. Broadly, the smile of a man who has come somewhere expecting one thing and found something considerably better. Nathaniel arrived 20 minutes later, still dusty from the North Fields, and stopped in the parlor doorway at the sight of Burks and Olivia seated across from each other, with the particular quality of 2 people who have been talking properly and are not done yet. "Harlan," he said, slightly wary. "Your wife," Burks said without preamble, "has just accepted an offer I came here to make to you." Nathaniel looked at Olivia. She looked back at him steadily. "She did," he said. "I did," she said. "Mrs. Burks is going to teach at the school 3 days a week. Starting next Monday." Nathaniel looked at Burks. Something passed between the 2 men, some old, complicated, layered thing that she wasn't entirely privy to. Then Nathaniel said, quietly, "Thank you, Harlan." Burks stood, picked up his hat. looked at Olivia one more time with that direct, measuring gaze. Edmund picked good people when he picked them, he said. He just didn't always know in advance what he was picking for. He left. Nathaniel looked at Olivia. She looked back at him. You accepted an offer from Harlan Burks, he said. He made a good offer, she said. Harlan Burks doesn't make offers, Nathaniel said. He makes pronouncements, people accept them or they don't. He paused. He made you an offer. She thought about that for a moment. He said I'd do, she said. That's Harlan's version of a standing ovation, Nathaniel said. She stood up and smoothed her dress. I should tell Ellen about Mrs. Burks, she said. She'll want to rearrange the schedule. She was almost at the door when Nathaniel said, Olivia. He crossed the room, not slowly, directly. With purpose, the way he moved when a decision had been made and he was done deliberating. He stopped in front of her, close, and looked at her face for a moment. Then he said, I looked at your uniform and never wondered about the woman wearing it. I've been ashamed of that for 4 weeks, and I haven't said properly. Her breath caught. Quietly, I'm saying it now, he said, I'm sorry. Not because of what you did for this estate, because of what I failed to see before you made me look. The room was completely still. She thought about the floor, about cold stone and a scrub brush and a contract placed beside her bucket without a word of greeting. She thought about how much it had cost her that morning to stand up. I know, she said softly. That ain't enough of an answer, he said. Yes, it is, she said, because it means I believe you. He looked at her for one long, steady, unguarded moment. All right, he said quietly. All right, she agreed, and somewhere in that simple exchange, in that morning plain kitchen language that neither of them had planned, something that had been carefully, slowly building for 4 weeks, settled into place. Not with ceremony, not with grand words or expensive gifts. Just 2 people in a parlor in Kentucky, 4 weeks into an arrangement that had become something neither of them had words for yet. Standing close enough that she could see the dust from the north fields still on his coat. And the fact that he'd come in straight from work, because the important thing was not the dust, but the conversation. The school needs a sign, she said after a moment. He blinked. Outside the parlor door, she said. Children learn better when things are named. It makes them feel like the space is real and it belongs to them. What do you want it to say? He asked. She thought for a moment. Whitmore School, she said. Just that, simple. He nodded. I'll get the carpenter. The same one who made the desks, she said. He does good work. I know, he said. I've used him for 15 years. She walked to the door. He said. She looked back. The afternoon light was on his face. He was looking at her with that expression, the one she kept cataloging. The one that kept getting incrementally warmer, but there was something new in it today. Something settled, like a man who has been searching for the right word for a very long time and has finally found it, and is not ready to say it yet, but knows now that when he is ready, it will be true. Thank you, he said, for seeing something worth saving. She held his gaze for a moment. Thank you, she said, for letting me. She went to find Ellen. Behind her, she heard him exhale slowly, the specific exhale of a man setting down a weight he has carried for a long time. And in the east parlor, on the slates lined up against the wall, in chalk that hadn't been erased yet, were the letters that James Prescott had practiced that morning, over and over until they were clean and certain and unmistakably his own. His name, written in his own hand, like something that had always been true and only now had been given the shape it deserved. The sign went up on a Tuesday. The carpenter, a quiet man named Horace, who had been making furniture for Whitmore Estate since Edmund's time, delivered it in the morning, carried it inside without ceremony, and held it against the wall outside the east parlor door so Nathaniel could check the height. Nathaniel looked at Olivia. She looked at the sign. Whitmore School. Clean letters, solid wood. Higher, she said. Children need to be able to read it themselves. Horace moved it up 3 inches. There, she said. Nathaniel nodded to Horace, who drove the first nail. And that was that. The school had a name on the wall and 14 children arriving in 20 minutes, and Mrs. Burke's already inside rearranging the reading corner in a way that was slightly different from how Olivia had arranged it, but was, she had to admit, probably better. It was the most ordinary moment. Nobody made a speech, nobody marked it as significant. But Ellen, standing in the corridor watching Horace drive the second nail, pressed both hands over her mouth the way she did when she was trying not to cry. And Olivia put a hand on her shoulder briefly and said nothing. Because nothing needed to be said. Some things were simply true. You put a sign on the wall and they became more true. The months that followed moved the way good things move, not dramatically. Not in single moments of triumph, but in the steady accumulation of days that were better than the ones before them. The estate's finances continued to stabilize. The recovered funds from Victor's accounts came back in 3 installments, each one allowing another repair, another debt settled. Another piece of the estate returned to what it had been before a man with a traveling bag and a year-old plan had arrived to dismantle it. The legal proceedings concluded in March. Victor Caldwell was formally found to have committed fraud against Whitmore Estate. The judgment required repayment of all funds taken, plus legal costs, and barred him from any future claim on Whitmore property. The secondary clause in Edmund's will was voided completely by the codicil, which the court accepted as genuine and binding. Nathaniel read the judgment in the south study with Thomas present and Olivia across the desk from him. When he finished, he set the paper down very carefully, the way you set something down when your hands aren't entirely steady. "It's done," Thomas said. "It's done," Nathaniel said. He looked at Olivia. She looked back at him. There were no words for what the look contained. It was too full for words: relief and grief and gratitude, and the complicated particular feeling of something terrible being finally proper over. She didn't try to put words around it. She just held his gaze and let it be what it was. "Your grandfather's estate stands," she said quietly. Just that. His jaw moved. He nodded once. Thomas excused himself with the tact of a man who understood exactly when he was not needed. The door closed, and Nathaniel Whitmore, who had not broken in front of anyone through 6 months of betrayal and 3 months of legal proceedings and all the accumulated weight of a desperate marriage on a desperate morning that had turned into something neither of them had planned, put his head in his hands for about 30 seconds. She didn't move, didn't speak, didn't try to fix it or minimize it or redirect it. She just stayed. When he looked up, his eyes were clear. Tired and clear and more open than she had ever seen them. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "Do what?" she said. "Feel relieved," he said. "I've been braced for so long. I don't—" He stopped. "I don't know what to do when there's nothing left to brace against." She thought about that. About her own 4 years of bracing. About the way you learn to hold yourself tight against the next blow until holding tight becomes the only way you know how to stand. "You don't do anything," she said. "You just let it be over. It takes a while, but it gets easier." He looked at her. "How long?" he said. "I'll tell you when I get there," she said honestly. He laughed, that real, unguarded laugh, and it broke through whatever had been sitting heavy in the room. And she felt herself smile, and that was enough. That was exactly enough. The spring came in warm and fast the way Kentucky springs did. Like the land had been waiting impatiently all winter. The fields greened up. The farmhands moved with more energy, which Olivia suspected was connected to the fact that they now understood the estate was solvent and their wages were not at risk. Small things changed the way people worked. She had learned that a long time ago. The school grew. Mrs. Burke's turned out to be an extraordinary teacher, patient and exacting in equal measure. The kind of teacher who expected children to rise to the work and was rarely disappointed. By April, there were 23 students. By May, there were 31, including 4 children from families on neighboring land who had heard about it from James Prescott's mother, who had apparently become the school's most enthusiastic advocate in the county. Ellen was formally appointed as the school's assistant teacher in April. Olivia offered it to her on a Tuesday morning, sitting at the kitchen work table over biscuits. The same table where she had eaten for 2 years as a servant and continued to eat because it was her table and she saw no reason to stop. She said, "I want to pay you properly for what you're doing." "Not a servant's wages, a teacher's wages." Ellen stared at her. "I'm not a teacher," she said. "I'm still learning." "You've been teaching for 3 months," Olivia said. "The children learn from you. That makes you a teacher." She looked at Ellen steadily. "You've been helping me so that you can learn without admitting you needed to." "I've known that since the second week." Ellen went very red. "I don't care," Olivia said. "There's no shame in wanting to learn. There is a waste in pretending you don't. So I'm offering you teacher's wages and a proper title, and I'd like you to say yes." Ellen opened her mouth. Closed it. "Yes," she said. "Good," Olivia said. "Now eat your biscuit." Margaret laughed from the stove, which she had been trying to contain for about a minute. What Olivia had not told Ellen, what she had told no one yet, because she was still turning it over in her mind. Testing its weight from different angles was the larger plan that had been forming since February. The school in the East Parlor was 31 students and growing past what one room could reasonably hold. The East Parlor had always been a temporary solution. She had known that going in. What she wanted to build was something permanent. A proper schoolhouse, on Whitmore land, close enough to the estate to be supported by it, but separate enough to belong to the community rather than to any single family. A building that would stand after she was gone, after Nathaniel was gone, after all of them were gone, a thing built to last rather than built to serve a single need in a single season. She had been working on the numbers for 2 months. She knew they were possible. She knew the timing, the materials, the labor, the costs. She had the whole thing mapped out in a document she kept in the writing desk in her room, next to Daniel Reeves' note, and the letter from Edmund's lawyer, and a few other things she kept because they were true and worth keeping. She brought it to Nathaniel on a Friday evening in May. She came to the south study and set the document on the desk in front of him without preamble and said, "I want to talk to you about something." He looked at the document, then at her. He had learned in the months since the library floor and the letter and all the rest of it to read the difference between her different kinds of bringing things to his desk. This was the serious kind, the considered kind, the kind that meant she had thought it through completely and was ready. He picked it up and read. He read it the way he read things, completely, without interruption, taking it in fully before responding. She sat across from him and waited. She was good at waiting when the waiting was worth it. When he looked up, his expression was not what she expected. It was not the careful neutral of a man considering costs. It was not the slight wariness of someone calculating risk. It was open, warm, the expression of a man who has been handed something that confirms something he already believed. "A schoolhouse," he said. "On the south quarter," she said. "The field that doesn't yield well anyway. It's close enough to the road that families can reach it without crossing private land. And it's on higher ground so it won't flood. You scouted the location," he said. "3 weeks ago," she said. "I walked it twice." "You've had this in your head for months," he said. "February," she said. "When the East Parlor got to 20 students and I realized the room wasn't built for this." He looked back at the document, at her numbers, her timeline, her material lists, her projected costs, at the careful, methodical shape of a plan built by someone who didn't bring half-finished things to other people's desks. "The cost," he said, "if we build in 2 phases. The first phase gets the structure up and functional by fall. The second phase, the second floor, the expanded rooms, that's a year from now when the recovered funds have fully cleared." He set the document down. "What does Harlan Burks think?" he said. She looked at him. "I haven't told him yet. You'll need his support," Nathaniel said. "If you want this to be a county institution rather than a Whitmore charity project, you need the bank's backing and his name behind it." "I know," she said. "I wanted to talk to you first." He was quiet for a moment. Something in his face shifted that thing she'd been cataloging. the warmth that had been increasing in increments since January. That she was finally slowly allowing herself to look at directly rather than sideways. "Why?" he said, genuinely asking. "Because it's your land," she said, and because she stopped. Found the honest version, because I wanted it to be ours before I took it anywhere else. The South study was very quiet. Outside, the spring evening was long and warm, the kind that made Kentucky feel like a promise rather than a place. "It's yours," Nathaniel said. "Whatever you need from me to build it, it's yours." She looked at him for a moment. "Say it the other way," she said quietly. He understood immediately. "It's ours," he said. She nodded. The meeting with Harlan Burks happened the following week. In the front parlor over coffee, and it lasted 2 hours and covered every aspect of the plan in the direct, thorough, occasionally combative style that she had come to understand was how Burks showed respect. He questioned every number. He challenged every timeline. He proposed 3 alternative approaches, all of which she had already considered and rejected. And she explained her reasoning for each rejection clearly and completely. At the end of 2 hours, he said, "The bank will back it." Just that. No preamble, no qualification. "The bank will back it," he said. "And I'll put my name to it, and we'll call it a county school. Not a Whitmore school, so that it stands on its own when the 2 of you are long gone." She started to speak. "My wife suggested the name," he said. "The Hartwell Whitmore School." He looked at Olivia directly. "Her name first, because she's the one who started it." Olivia sat very still for a moment. "The Hartwell Whitmore School. Her father's name. Her name. On a building on a piece of Kentucky ground that would stand and serve children long after everything else had changed." That she started. "Don't argue with it," Burke said. "I wasn't going to," she said. He almost smiled. "Good," he said. "Because I've found that arguing with my wife about names is a losing proposition, and I suspect the same rule applies to yours." He left. She sat in the front parlor for a long time after he was gone. The Hartwell Whitmore School. She thought about her father. About the ledgers she'd kept since she was 16. About the warehouse near the river that had been a poor investment because of the flooding. About the 30 days and the single traveling bag and the cold floor of a corridor in a house that hadn't been hers. About a contract placed on that floor, about standing up. She thought about all of it, and she felt, for the first time in a long time, that the line from there to here was not a story of loss and survival, but something else. Something with a different shape. Not the shape of a woman who had endured what happened to her, but of a woman who had used it, every part of it. The hard parts and the cold parts and the raw hands parts, to become exactly who she was standing here being. She did not cry. She was not generally a person who cried easily. But she stayed in the parlor for a while and let herself feel the full weight of it. And that was enough. The construction started in June. The summer was hot and busy and loud, in the way that building things is always loud, the sound of hammers and saws and men calling to each other across distances. The particular smell of fresh-cut wood that Olivia found she loved without having expected to. She was at the site every morning. Not to supervise. Horace was managing the construction, and he knew what he was doing, but because it was hers, and she wanted to watch it become real. Nathaniel came most mornings too. Not always. The estate kept him occupied, but often enough that it became a kind of ritual. They would stand at the edge of the site in the early heat, with coffee from Margaret's kitchen, and watch the walls go up. And sometimes they talked, and sometimes they didn't. And both were equally good. It was on one of those mornings, a Wednesday in late July, when the frame was fully up and the roof was beginning to take shape, that Mrs. Hargrove arrived unannounced. Olivia saw the carriage coming up the road and recognized it and said, "Without particular concern, Mrs. Hargrove." Nathaniel looked. "What does she want?" "I'll find out," Olivia said. Mrs. Hargrove stepped out of the carriage with her usual precise authority and looked at the construction site with the expression she reserved for things that were larger than she had expected. "I heard it was coming along," she said. "I wanted to see for myself." And Olivia said, Mrs. Hargrove looked at the frame, at the foundation, at the workers moving with the specific efficiency of men who were well managed and well compensated, which she would know at a glance, because she was a woman who noticed such things. It's going to be substantial, she said. It needs to be, Olivia said. If it's going to last. Mrs. Hargrove turned to look at her. The sharp, assessing gaze that Olivia had been looked at with since the very first visit, but carrying something different in it now, something that had been building across 6 months of school mornings and legal proceedings and a sign on a wall and a name being carried through the county in the mouths of parents whose children were learning to read. I owe you an apology, Mrs. Hargrove said. Olivia waited. When I came to call that first time, Mrs. Hargrove said, I came to look at you, to assess whether you were acceptable, whether the county would need to tolerate you or could safely ignore you. She said it without flinching, which Olivia respected. I was condescending and I was wrong, and I believe in saying so plainly when that's the case. The construction site was loud behind them. Hammers, men calling out, the frame of a school going up in the summer heat. I know why you came, Olivia said. I've known since that morning. And you were still civil to me, Mrs. Hargrove said. You hadn't done anything I couldn't live with, Olivia said simply. You assessed me. That's reasonable. I assessed you too, and what did you decide? That you were sharp and fair and more open to reconsidering than you looked, Olivia said. And that your granddaughter needed a better reader than you were giving her credit for, Mrs. Hargrove's mouth twitched. She read me 3 chapters of a novel last week, she said. Without stopping. I know, Olivia said, she told me. Something broke through Mrs. Hargrove's composure then not collapsed, not shattered. Just opened, the way a window opens, to let in air. She looked at Olivia with something that was simply, undisguisedly real. What you've done here, she said. In less than a year, I want you to know that I see it. Olivia looked at the frame of the schoolhouse going up against the July sky. I want you to know, she said, that I wasn't doing it to be seen. I know, Mrs. Hargrove said. That's precisely why I'm saying so. She stayed for an hour. She walked the site with Olivia and asked specific, intelligent questions about the second phase plans. And by the time she left, she had offered, not announced a contribution toward the cost of the second-floor classroom expansion that was specific of in amount, that it was clearly not a gesture but a decision she had already made before she arrived. Nathaniel watched her carriage leave and said quietly, Mrs. Hargrove just donated to your school. Our school, Olivia said. He looked at her sidelong. Our school, he said. The celebration, because there was a celebration. Though Olivia had not planned one, and would not have planned one if the choice had been hers alone, was Nathaniel's doing. He organized it without telling her until 4 days before it happened, which was both annoying, and she admitted to herself. Exactly right, because if he had told her earlier, she would have spent those days redirecting the energy toward something more practical. He told her on a Monday evening in the South Study, with the particular careful expression of a man who is braced for an argument and has decided to have it anyway. There's going to be a gathering, he said, Saturday. For the school opening. She looked at him. The school isn't finished. The first phase is finished, he said. The classrooms are ready. The building is sound. Children can learn in it. She opened her mouth. Quiet and direct. People need to mark things. They need to come together and say this happened and it matters and we were here for it. That's not vanity. That's how communities hold together. She closed her mouth. He was right, and she knew he was right, and the fact that she knew it didn't make the words any easier to receive, which was a thing she was still working on the receiving. Being seen without wanting to step sideways out of it. Fine, she said. Thank you. Don't thank me, she said. I'm not happy about it. I know and he was clearly trying not to smile, which was its own kind of infuriating. Saturday came warm and golden the way the best days in late summer do. Like the weather had been informed of the occasion and decided to cooperate. They came from all over the county. More people than she had expected more, she thought, than Nathaniel had expected too, though he didn't say so. The farmhands and their families, the Prescotts, James walking ahead of his mother with the particular confidence of a boy who has learned something and knows it. The Reeve family, Daniel Reeve with his 2 sons, who had been in school since February and could now do sums that made their father shake his head in quiet amazement. Mrs. Burks, who had been at the site since early morning, helping arrange the tables. Ellen, who had worn her best dress and done her hair and was trying very hard not to look like someone for whom this day meant everything. Mrs. Hargrove came. She brought 4 other women from her circle, 2 of whom Olivia had never met, and introduced them with the air of a woman who had decided that vouching for someone was a thing she was going to do fully and publicly. Harlan Burks came with his wife, a small, bright-eyed woman named Ruth, who gripped Olivia's hand at the door and said, "I've been wanting to meet you for months," with such genuine warmth that Olivia was briefly and uncharacteristically without words. Daniel Reeve brought a cake, carried it himself, set it on the table, with the manner of a man delivering something important. And the children came, all 31 of the school's students, and several younger siblings who weren't enrolled yet, but whose parents had brought them anyway. Dressed carefully, brought early, standing in clusters with the restless, specific energy of children who knew something significant was happening and were trying to decide whether to be solemn or excited about it. James Prescott was the one who asked. He found Olivia standing near the door of the schoolhouse and said, with the directness that she had come to love about him, "Are you going to say something?" "Someone else should say something," she said. "Mr. Whitmore said you should say something," James said. She looked across the gathered crowd at Nathaniel, who was talking to Burks, and who at precisely that moment looked up and met her eyes with an expression of complete, deliberate, innocent neutrality that told her he had absolutely said that. She looked back at James. "Did he?" "Yes." "Ma'am," James said. "He said you built it so you should be the one to open it." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, go tell people to gather round." James went. He went with the focused speed of a 10-year-old, given an important task. And within 3 minutes the crowd had assembled in the rough half-circle in front of the schoolhouse door. And they were all looking at her. She stood in front of the door with the sign above her head, the Hartwell Whitmore School, and looked at the faces looking back at her. She thought about what to say. She had not prepared anything. She did not generally prepare speeches, because prepared speeches had a way of sounding like the person who had prepared them, rather than the person who was standing in front of you right now. She thought about James reading his first sentence, about Ellen's hands pressed over her mouth when the sign went up, about Margaret's table, about cold stone floors and raw hands and a contract placed beside a bucket, about standing up. "I came to this county 2 years ago with a traveling bag and a letter of reference," she said. Her voice was clear and level and carried without effort. "I came because I needed work and Whitmore Estate offered honest wages. I did not come expecting anything beyond that." The crowd was very quiet. "I've been told, in the month since, that what I've done here is remarkable," she said. "I want to push back on that. What I did was look at what needed doing and do it. That's not remarkable. That's just being a person." She looked at the children in the crowd. "But this," she said, "this building. These children learning to read their own names, to write letters to their own families, to understand the contracts they'll be asked to sign one day. This is something. This will be here when all of us are gone. This will change what their children's lives look like. And their children's children." She paused. "That's the thing worth marking today. Not me, not what I did this." She put her hand on the door. "The Hartwell Whitmore School is open," she said. "Come in." She pushed the door open. For a half-second, nobody moved. Then James Prescott walked through the door first. Because of course he did. And then his younger sister, pulled by the hand, And then Ruth Burks, who took Olivia's hand as she passed and squeezed it once without words. And then Ellen, who stopped in the doorway and looked at Olivia with those enormous eyes and said, barely above a whisper, "Your father would have been proud." Olivia breathed. "Go teach," she said softly. Ellen went. She stood at the door and let them all pass through the children. The families, the neighbors, the people who had once come to assess her and stayed to support her. The people who had watched from a distance and chosen today to be closer. She stood at the door and she let it happen, and she did not step sideways. Nathaniel came last. He stopped beside her in the doorway, not going through. Not pulling her inside, just stopping there beside her the way he had been doing. Quietly for months, present, not managing, not directing. Just there. "You said come in," he said, like you were inviting them into your house. "It is my house," she said. In the way that matters. He looked at her. The crowd inside was warm and loud with voices and children, and the specific joyful chaos of 31 students showing their parents their desks. Their slates, the letters they'd practiced, the names written in their own hands. "Olivia," he said. "Yes?" He was looking at her with that expression, the one she had catalogued and stored and examined from every angle, and it was completely, finally fully open, no calculation, no management. No careful distance, just him. "I thought I needed a wife," he said. "I thought that was the thing I needed." She waited. "I needed you," he said, specifically. "I needed someone who would tell me no on the floor of my own corridor and stand back up and read the contract anyway, and change 2 clauses from memory." He held her gaze. "I needed someone who would see what Victor was doing before I could bring myself to look. Who would build 62 pages of proof and then sit on my library floor sorting books. Who would open a school in my East Parlor and then build a real one on my South Quarter and put her own name on it." His voice was steady and quiet and entirely without performance. "I needed someone who would stay, not because she had to. Because she chose to." The sound of the school behind them. Children's voices. Ellen's voice, carrying with the clear authority of a teacher who had finally claimed the word. "I know what I felt that first morning," Nathaniel said. "When you told me no, I didn't have a word for it then. I do now." "Say it," she said quietly. "Relief," he said, for the first time in years. Because the woman standing in front of me wasn't what I'd been looking for. She was better, and I didn't know yet what to do with that. But I knew something in me knew that this mattered. That she mattered." He paused. "That you mattered," she breathed. 4 years of cold floors and raw hands and 30 days and a traveling bag, and all the mornings she had been the first one up in a house that didn't belong to her. One morning on her knees in a corridor when a contract landed beside her bucket. "Standing up, I knew too," she said. "When you picked it back up. When you held it out properly." She met his eyes without flinching. "I knew you were someone worth choosing." He reached out and took her hand. The same as the courthouse step. The same easy, unhesitating gesture of a man who had stopped calculating whether it was the right thing to do and was simply doing it because it was true. "Equal," he said. "Equal," she said. And she held his hand and looked at the school they had built together on Kentucky ground. The sound of children's voices coming through the open door. James Prescott's voice among them explaining something to his sister with the confident enthusiasm of a boy who knows something and wants to share it. And she understood. With the full and quiet certainty of a woman who had learned to trust her own assessments. That this was not the end of the story. This was what the story had always been building toward. Not the moment she signed the contract, not the 62 pages. Or the letter, or Victor's exit through the front door. Not even the night in the library, with the sorted books and the warm fire. This. 2 people standing in a doorway they had built together. Holding on, looking at what they had made of the hard and the unlikely and the impossible seeming. And knowing both of them equally, at the same time that the woman who had come here with a traveling bag and no expectations had not ended up in this story by accident. She had always been the woman who would change everything. She had simply needed a door to walk through, and she had walked through it herself.